Alright, so you are going to take your 4 sheets of paper, and this is how you want them laying on your desk, with the 2 that are the same color on top. Okay? Alright, you are going to put a little gap in between each page. Do not make it too big, because when we make our flip book, if you make your tabs too big, there won't be much space left to write on the inside. So you just want it big enough where you can write one word on that tab. Okay? So definitely don't make those very big, or you won't have enough space for writing on the inside of it, especially on those top flaps. Okay, so once you have them staggered, again, do not make those tabs very big. Okay? Does everybody have this so far? Okay. Now you're going to keep it laying on your desk, just like that. So it's just like this. And you're going to fold the top half down to create more tabs, so they'll line up. So you'll have about the same space again. So you end up with 4 of the same color tabs in the middle. Okay? Again, do not make your tabs too big, or there won't be enough space for writing. So once you have it folded over, it's going to look something like this. I'm going to come around and staple it for you. So the top flap should be pretty large. If it's not about this size, I want you to take it back apart and make your tab smaller. So it needs to be about this size for your top tab. Okay? Just want to make sure that you've got plenty of space underneath that top tab, because we're going to write a lot of information inside of here. So you're going to need this space. Okay? Alright, so while you are arranging your papers, I will come by and staple it for you once you have the right size.
Take one back. Grab a red. Every color. Wow.
You need 2 that are the same color, only 4 pieces. Grab 2 of the same color, 4 pieces total. If one of these guys coming in late, guys, is sitting beside you, you could help them organize it and fold their papers. Alright, is there anybody who haven't stayed here? Okay. Alright, so everybody's page should look something like this. Okay, now we're going to label all of the flaps and give our book a title. So you have to use these tabs in this order. If you want to change the name, you're welcome to change the name, but it needs to say something about quadrilaterals, okay? So I'll give you a second to copy those down. So we've got kites, parallelograms, rectangles, rhombi, squares, trapezoids, and area formulas is the last tab. And then you need to give your book a title. I also need you to, once you've filled all that in, flip it over on the back and write your name on it. In case it falls out of your binder, we know who to return it to. So put your name on the back somewhere. Were you guys on the symbol? Is that what it was? Yeah. not including your title page, okay? So basically the first tab where there's 4 of the same color, the one that should read parallelograms, okay, you're going to open up to the parallelograms. So you're going to lift up your title page and you're going to lift up heights. And that's where we're going to be writing first. So go ahead and fold it open there. The first part that we're going to write is going to be down here on the orange for me section, whatever color you have your word parallelogram written on. You're going to write down here first, okay? So this is where I'm about to write in this space, okay? So you pulled up the tab that says your title, you pulled up the tab that said heights, and that's where I'm going to write. It should still say parallelograms right down here. Okay? All right. So, like I said, this is what we are copying down onto the flap that says parallelogram right here. Okay? All right, so for parallelograms, we are first going to write down our properties, or basically what your reasons would be if you were writing a proof. Okay? So we're going to list out all of our properties for parallelograms. The first property is that opposite sides are parallel. Feel free to abbreviate as long as you understand what it means. But the first property is that opposite sides are parallel. Okay, so in this shape right here, this line and this line are opposite of one another. Therefore, they're parallel, and this side are opposite of one another, so they're parallel. I want you to also draw this picture of a parallelogram. And remember, to show parallel sides, we put little arrows on them, right? So I have a small arrow on the top and bottom line, and then 2 small arrows on the ends to show that the 2 ends are parallel as well.
How big should the shape be?
Don't make it, so how I have this line divided here, we're going to have stuff written on both halves. So keep it on 1/2 of your flap there. And we're going to write down 5 in this list right here. So just write small enough that you can fit a list of 5 things. Okay. Right, so first, opposite sides are parallel. We mark that with the little arrows on the lines. Our next property is that opposite sides are congruent. And remember, to show congruent, we just put one little small mark, not arrows, but a little mark to mark congruency. So those same ones that were parallel are also congruent. And congruent means what? The same, right? So if this one had a length of 6 inches, so does the bottom, right? So opposite sides are parallel and opposite sides are congruent. So you'll write that down and then mark it on your shape as well. Okay, so far on our shape, I have an arrow here and an arrow here for parallel, and 2 arrows on the ends for parallel here, a mark here and a mark here for congruent, 2 marks here and 2 marks here for congruent. All right. Okay. Our third property is that opposite angles are congruent. So angles that are opposite of one another in the figure are congruent. So I'm going to mark this angle and this angle, both with 1 mark. And then I'll mark the other 2 angles with 2 marks. Because we're not saying they're all 4 congruent, we're just saying the ones opposite of one another are congruent. Okay? All right, our fourth property or reason is that consecutive angles are supplementary. So what does supplementary mean? Add up to 180. Consecutive means one after another, right? So these 2 come one after another, so they're supplementary. These 2 come one after another, so they're supplementary. These 2 come one after another, so they're supplementary. These 2 come one after another, so they're supplementary. Okay? There's not anything for you to mark on your picture for that. Okay, and then we have one more property. The fifth property says that the diagonals bisect each other. So draw two diagonals into your parallelogram. The diagonal just goes from vertex to vertex in both corners. And what does it mean to bisect something? Cut it in half. So it's going to cut it into two congruent pieces. So on this diagonal, this piece that I mark with 3 lines is congruent to its other half. And the same is true on the other diagonal. So I have a diagonal going this direction, but we're not saying they're congruent to the other diagonal. So I'll mark this piece with 4 marks and this piece with 4 marks to show that just these 2 pieces are equal to one another. Okay, now on the other half of this tab, we're now going to write down the theorems or the ways that we would prove these things. Okay, so these are our theorems, which just means our ways to prove. So we're basically going to have one for each in our list. Okay, the first one. If both pairs of opposite sides are congruent, then it is a parallelogram. So that you're not writing out the word parallelogram every single time, you just draw a picture of a parallelogram instead of writing the word. So if you can prove that both pairs of opposite sides are congruent, that's enough to say that you have a parallelogram. So opposite sides are congruent proves you have a parallelogram. If both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, then you have a parallelogram. If you can prove that your angles across from one another here and here are congruent, that's enough to prove you have a parallelogram. Okay, so if you notice, we skipped the first one, right? Opposite sides being parallel, that is not enough to prove a parallelogram on its own. Okay, so that's why we don't have it in our list over here. But number 2, opposite sides being congruent, that is enough to prove it. Okay. Number 3, opposite angles being congruent, that is enough to prove it. Okay. All right, our third would be if the diagonals bisect each other, then it's a parallelogram. So that's our 5th property, right? If you can prove that your diagonals bisect each other, which you guys said means cuts each other in half, that's enough to prove that you have a parallelogram. Okay. Now our 4th one is going to combine 2 things. This one says if one pair of sides are both parallel and congruent. So one pair. So that could be just this side and this side. If you can prove those 2 are both parallel and congruent, then that's enough to prove that you have a parallelogram. Okay? So you have to prove 2 things about one set. Okay, now the 5th property is now going to address this one up here. It can't just be one pair, like what it is on number 4. It's going to have to be both pairs are parallel in order to prove. So it can't just be one, it's got to be both pairs of opposite sides to be parallel in order for it to be a parallelogram. So basically it's going to be our same 5 properties, but this one here, consecutive angles are supplementary, that's not enough to prove a parallelogram. So that's not going to be listed as a way to prove. We're going to replace that one with the one if you prove two things about one set of sides. Then that's enough to say that it is a parallelogram. Okay, so after you have written all of that information in this part of your flat, we're now going to do two examples, and you're going to draw that up here. So it's actually technically on the back of the tab that says kites. So you're still in the same section, open to it, and we're going to draw two examples. So you're also going to want to divide this section in half, just like we did down here. We'll do one example over on this side and one example over on this side. Okay? All right, so for our first example, like I said, we are going to need to split this tab in half just like the bottom because we are going to have two examples. So this is what you're going to write in 1/2 of the top. The quadrilateral is a parallelogram with a 125-degree angle and a side of 15 as displayed. The perimeter is 80 feet. Find A through F. So you want to draw this picture. If you don't want to write this whole sentence, you don't have to, but write down the key things, right? Write down that you've got a 25-degree angle, one side 15, perimeter, just P equals 80, and draw this picture so that you know what it's referring to, okay? But you do not need to write the sentence word for word. Just make sure you have that picture drawn for yourself. So you're going to draw a parallelogram, and you're going to label the angles A, B, C, and the one that we would have named D we'll say is our 125-degree angle, okay? All right, and then I'm going to go label the outside pieces D, E, and F, and then this side over here is where we'll put that 15 that they were referring to. Okay. It just needs to fit in that 1/2, and now we're going to answer questions, so you aren't going to have to write any more words. It just needs to fit in half of that flap. All right, so A says opposite angles are congruent, right? Well, if this angle is 125 degrees, how many degrees should angle A be? Right. Those two are opposite and therefore congruent. Okay. Next, they're going to ask us for B. Well, angle B is right here, right? How could I find the measure of angle B? Right. These two angles are consecutive and therefore supplementary, so all I would need to do is, right, subtract from 180. So we would know angle B should be 55 degrees, right? All on the same side. We're all on the left side right now. And again, you don't have to write this whole sentence. You can abbreviate anywhere you want to abbreviate as long as it makes sense to you, okay? So A, we knew that A was 125, and you could have just written op and then use the angle symbol and congruent symbol, right? You don't have to write it in words. B, because we had consecutive angles, those are supplementary, therefore B equals 55 degrees. Okay. What about angle C? What would we know? What would it be? Same as B, right, because we said opposite angles are congruent. So I have C is 55, All right. D, that's a side length over here, right? What should be the length of D? 15y. Opposite sides are congruent. Good. Okay? All right. And then it also wants E and F. Well, how can I find E and F?
Subtract 30.
Right. Very good. So 15 here and 15 here, and they said perimeter was 80. So if I subtract out the 30 that's already used up, we know E and F are going to be equal, so we split it evenly. Very good. Opposite sides are congruent. That leaves 50 for them to split evenly. So E is 25, and if E is 25, F is also 25. Okay. Okay, and then we have one more example that we're going to copy down onto the other half of the flap over here. So that picture that you just drew was all right here. Now we're going to do the same thing over here. Okay. All right. So this is the parallelogram that you're going to copy down on that other half. You want to draw that picture. It says WXYZ is a parallelogram, which we know. It says the measure of angle ZWX is B. So ZWX, that would be this angle right here where the W is. It says that one is equal to B. So you can put a B in there. And angle WXY, which would be this angle here, equals C. So you can put a C in there. And then it says to find the values of A, B, C, and D. Okay. So starting with A. This side is where the A is, WX. We have that WX equals 2A. How can I solve for A? Yes.
2 base to the 22.
Very good. Nice. So we, again, know that opposite sides are congruent. So just like he said, we're going to set 2A equal to 22. Therefore, A has to be 11. Very good. Okay. For B, angle B is right here, right? And then X is where our angle C is, okay? So, in addition to what's already drawn here, I want you to draw in a diagonal. And on this part of the diagonal, we're going to mark that it's 31 degrees, and on this side of the diagonal, it's 18 degrees. But remember, they said angle B was ZWX, which is the entire angle, right? So how could I use that information to help me find the angle we called B?
Just the 2 sides of the angle on Y.
Mm-hmm.
They're equal.
Very good. Opposite angles are congruent, so if you add those two pieces together, we're going to get angle B. All right. And then they said this angle right here at X is angle C. So if I know angle B is 49, how could I use that to help me find C?
Supplementary.
Yes, they're supplementary. Very good. So angle C is right here. B and C being supplementary, I just subtract from 180 and we get that angle C is 131. Okay, and then the last thing they ask for is D. So I want you to draw another diagonal in. And they're saying that this portion right here is D, and this portion over here is 15.
D is also 15 because it's half of the other diagonal.
Right. Our property said that diagonals are bisected, which means cut in half. So if one half is 15, so is the other half. So D is also 15. Okay. So that is all we're going to fill in our book today. So it's going to take us a while to fill up this whole book, so make sure you do not lose this book. Keep it in your binder, okay? Alright, this is also in Schoology, guys. So if you ever miss a slide or you miss a piece of a slide, I post this PowerPoint in Schoology. You can pull it up there and copy down anything you miss, okay? Again, make sure that you wrote your name on the back of this flip book, so that way if it gets lost, they can return it to you and you don't have to start from scratch copying it all down again. Okay, so I just passed out this assignment. I know at the top